Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday and it is late. It is 7:30. So let me say a couple of things. Number one, I have been MIA and I know it and I apologize. I know some of you are faithful listeners. I had to go off the air for a couple of weeks. I had a lot of personal things going on. In particular, I took my daughter to law school, so I was gone for about a week and started a new job. And my schedule completely changed on me. So, one of the first things you have to know is because my schedule changed, I am going to have to change the time of this podcast. So, it is probably going to be at 7:30 on Wednesdays. Yeah, I get home pretty late now. So, I am going to have a time and share that time publicly this weekend. It's more than likely going to be at 7:30. This seems to be a good time for me. Gives me a chance to wind down before I talk to all of you. Daughter is safe and sound in law school now, which is still kind of shocking for me, but we were able to get through that. So sometimes life gets in the way, right? And so life got in the way of this podcast. However, it was so positive, so uplifting. I'm so happy, for example, for my daughter. However, I am back and excited and ready to talk to you all. I have something big going on that I'm not going to share publicly, but you will understand in a couple of months when I express victory because I claim it. So some of that will make sense here pretty soon. But I am back on this podcast. I will be writing my blog this Friday. I already have the title for it and know exactly what I'm going to write. So I appreciate you tuning in. I'm really thankful that you all have stuck with me. I hear from you in my email. Thank you. That email address is kidscanseeghosts@gmail.com. I also hear from you on different websites such as Quora, and I hear from you on Facebook, sometimes Facebook, and then I definitely hear from people on Instagram. So thank you so much for that. Here I am. Here I am. That's a song that my son sings. He goes, and we do this little dance. So that's how I'm feeling. I'm not even sure why he came up with that, but like when I'm really happy, I just go, So we just start dancing. So I just did a little dance for you. So we left off at blog 52. And so we are going to talk about that tonight. Blog 52 is called Ghost or Sleep Paralysis. By the way, I'm going to be back on social media probably next week live. So you all will be able to tune in to social media live next week as well. So getting back to the blog, it's blog 52, and I titled this one Ghost or Sleep Paralysis. Now, if you have been following me, you know, excuse me, that I was dying to talk about sleep paralysis because, believe it or not, I get a lot of questions about sleep paralysis from kids. They don't know it's sleep paralysis, and I don't tell them, but I do get a lot of questions about it. And I also get a lot of questions from adults about their kids possibly having sleep paralysis. Now it gets a little tricky. It gets a little tricky. And it gets tricky because I don't see ghosts. So a lot of times I only have to go off of my clinical experience and common sense too. So there are times, however, when I talk to kids who can see ghosts, who talk to me about their feelings at night with not being able to get out of the bed. This actually was a conversation that I had earlier this year with a child. And so if you look at the picture on the website, this picture, and I credited the author or the artist for this picture probably at the bottom of the blog. But this picture depicts exactly what these kids tell me. You know, the ones that can see ghosts talk about there being a demon on top of them that's holding them down and they can't get up. They feel paralyzed. That's what they're talking about. I can't move my body. I can't get up. I'm just laying there. And so, very similar to the picture that you see on my website. And it's interesting because I'll have two different kinds of kids who talk about this and two different types of adults. I have adults and kids who don't see ghosts, but then I'll talk to kids and adults who do see ghosts. And obviously, the kids who can see ghosts will describe what the entity looks like on their body, like this picture that I put on my webpage. The individuals who do not see ghosts talk about they just feel paralyzed in their sleep, but they all say collectively that it just feels like something is on top of their chest and there's no reason for them not to be able to get up. I heard this for years from these two groups of people. So before I started writing this stuff out in a blog and these occurrences, talking about them on this podcast, these are some of the notes that I was taking from various clients about feeling like they had sleep paralysis. Now, all of that is in the past. This year, I met a couple of more people who talked about this. And so when I wrote this blog, it was back in March. And back in March, there was a child who shared this with me. Sometimes when I sleep at night, I feel something pressing on my chest and I cannot get up no matter how hard I try. And right after that, I'll tell you that there was another kid who said to me, I actually saw a ghost sitting on my chest and would not leave me alone. And it was pressing on me when I was asleep. And I didn't write that part in the blog, but I remember that because there were actually two children. And I was able to get a lot of details from both of the kids. These were actually older kids, these were teenagers. And so the way that the kid who could actually see what was on top of the chest, the way that was described was I was immobile. I couldn't get up. I couldn't move. It was just sitting on me and wouldn't get up. It was dark, it was a dark angel. They sit on us like this. It was sitting on me. All I could do is just lay there, right? And so we could diagnose a lot of these different experiences for people. Obviously, sleep or sleep deprivation gets in the way of our functioning or daily living. The interesting issue for me is that kids that can see ghosts all describe this experience as being demonic. And as a psychologist, or someone in psychology or school psychologist, mental health professional, it will make your hair stand up on your chest because sleep paralysis is diagnosable. And so you have to be able to distinguish between these kids seeing ghosts and they describe it to you versus what? It being a psychological phenomena or phenomenon. So that's where it would get tricky for me. So in this case, the kid that I was talking to during this time of the year, like I said earlier this year, was adamant about just not being able to get this demon off of this child's chest. And so this one asked me what it all meant. And that's a hard question because there are a couple of different angles, you can go with this. One, you can just be a mental health professional Two, you could be um, someone who just doesn't believe these kids, or you can be someone who completely denies the existence of what they're talking about. And for me, I never do that. I never deny. These have been stories that I heard about for many, many years. And so once these entities leave, according to the kids that can see ghosts, then they can get up. Sometimes these entities will get up off of them according to them, not me. They will get off of them and they will start roaming around their room. This particular child said that's exactly what happened. It was roaming around the room. And so I, let's see, remember feeling like, what do I do? This one, even if I heard about it in the past, this one is always really tricky for me as a professional because I don't specialize in sleep. So, one of the things that I do, other than listen to these kids, is to see if they want to go further or their parents do with possibly seeing a sleep specialist or, having a sleep study or seeing, a neurologist or a neuropsychologist, someone who will specialize in sleep deprivation or difficulty with sleeping. That is outside of the area of my expertise. I have some experiences in neuropsychology because I did a year externship when I was getting my doctorate in neuropsychology. So I have some experience in neuropsychology and testing, and I wanted that deeper experience because I knew I was going to specialize in, behavior concerns, in particular ADHD. But I didn't get to do anything in the area of sleep. So there are other people who can treat this. So I'll tell you, there hasn't been one kid or adult who could see ghosts, who's dealt with sleep paralysis because of ghosts, to them, because of ghosts, who wanted to go and see a neurologist. Not one, because they said, what do you think they said? They said, it's a ghost. Well, I don't need a neurologist for that. Now, that might sound a little off to some of you, but to them, it's real. They can see ghosts. So they feel as if that they are justified in feeling like, if I could just um, either, pray this thing away, because a lot of them feel as if that works, or somehow keep it from getting on my chest, or I see it when I open my eyes, it's there. I don't need another doctor telling me, how to do this. I can get rid of it myself. Now, that's typically of older kids and adults. But if you have someone who is in your care who can't see ghosts, they don't know what to do. Neurologists and neuropsychologists who specialize in sleep disorders can deal with that. I am coming from the perspective of working with individuals primarily who could see ghosts, who were able to see what was going on. Collectively, I would give referrals to neurologists and neuropsychologists because that's what I'm supposed to do, right? But it gets really interesting and tricky because you are faced with a situation with kids who can see ghosts and adults who can see ghosts, who will just tell you flat out, no, it's like a ghost or a demon on my chest. But it's that for everyone. That's what they were saying. Everyone who feels like they have sleep paralysis, they actually can't get up because it's demonic. It's a demon sitting on your chest. And that's the only thing that's doing it. There is no other reason why people can't get up from their sleep, or they're feeling like, something is pressing on their chest. And so I was, some sleep paralysis with individuals who can see ghosts always captivated my attention. You know, when you are in a doctorate program, at least in clinical psychology, because I can't speak for anything else but that specialty or school psychology, you do learn about sleep disorders. At least in my program, you did. You don't learn how to deal with individuals who can see ghosts. So sometimes it's trial and error. As long as you're ethical and legal and you have the consent of your clients, you can talk to them about these things and see what you can put into place to help them. For me, it was more of, I've dealt with this for so many years, or I've heard about this for so many years, that I automatically will do referrals even if they don't want them. However, I don't turn them away just because they tell me, no, I don't need to do anything, there's a ghost on my chest. I mean, it'll throw you off for a minute. It'll throw you off for a minute. It throws me off just talking about it, which might be why I'm a little bit back and forth with it. I'm still picturing myself talk to, these two individuals earlier this year, and it's so captivating. Just like, do you know all the scientific stuff that goes on? I mean, psychology is a science. All the scientific stuff that goes on to determine the catalyst for sleep paralysis. And you're sitting here telling me you think you have sleep paralysis, but it's because why? There's a demon on your chest. You see why it can be tricky? Okay. So, excuse me. Now, when it comes to sleep paralysis, scientists talk about these things happening in your deeper sleep or your rapid eye movement, REM sleep. People are dreaming during this time. And so, in that sleep cycle, scientists and, doctors are saying, sleep paralysis occurs during that time. The muscles are paralyzed during this time anyway. So, you know, they're not probably seeing ghosts on their chest. They might be dreaming about it, or hallucinations can be common during this time. Dreaming, basically. And so it's not a ghost, it's their brain doing it. So that would be more of the scientific explanation. The kids, like this kid or these two kids that I was talking to earlier this year, they don't just stop with something being on their chest. And they always feel like they're up. They're like, no, I'm up because I'm trying to get this thing off my chest. I am completely conscious. They don't say conscious, I do. I feel it, I see it, I feel it touching me. Touch is tactile sensations. It touches me. Excuse me. A little bit hoarse, excuse me. Um, and when it gets off of me, is walking around the room. So for kids that can see ghosts, it is more than just it's sitting on my chest. They actually see it. And what's ironic about the whole thing for me too is that the stories are pretty much the same from these kids. They're pretty much the same. Now, go to Child J real quick. If you look back in the blog, you'll figure out who Child J is. Child J had one of these experiences and shared it with me. And specifically said it was very scary. I saw it. It was dark. It was a demon. It was sitting on my chest. It was like, see, how do I explain it? It was holding this kid's chest, the clothes, and this kid tried to turn his or her eyes to the side so that he or she would not see this demon because it was scary. And that's according to this child. He or she said, this is just scary. It's sitting on my chest and I can't get it off. And it's happened before. So when you can't move, like I can't imagine not being able to move in my sleep. That's scary enough, right? Because you don't know why you can't move. Most of us, those of us who can't see, go. Then these kids see them, so they're already scared because they can't move. But then they open their eyes and see that it's something sitting on their chest. According to them, this is terrifying. So some would also get this report to me that they were hovering over them as they were trying to move their bodies. Can you imagine that? Especially if you're a kid, but these things were hovering over them. And so, again, research will say even the hovering is probably a hallucination, or brain sensations, or disturbances in the senses in the body, or a disturbance in the sense of self, which sounds like Freud, doesn't it? Sigmund Freud, and a disturbance in brain activity or parts of the brain causing paralysis, such as the whole motor cortex, which is in the talking about like the cerebellum and that part of the brain, or just chemical changes in the brain. Now that's a whole lot of hypotheses when kids who see ghosts say, it's a demon on my chest. There's a lot of hypotheses in science now. I don't negate science. It is what it is. There are plenty of smart scientists um, who will argue and say seeing ghosts can be the result of the same thing. Brain chemical changes in the brain, or abnormal brain activity, or hallucinations means that they might have a psychotic disorder. And I don't argue with them, but I will argue with them about one thing, is that when it comes to reports, and I can only speak for myself, and I have a few colleagues who can back me up on this, there are clients who can see ghosts who will tell you the same stories over and over again, that it's a demon who sits on my chest. They have the same visions. It might be different. They might describe demons looking differently on their chest, but they're all dark and they sit there and they won't move. This has been going on for a long, long time. And I would argue, even if they do have some strange, you know, some different kind of brain activity, what is the sensation of something sitting on them? Where does that come from? Why do they have the perception that something is sitting on them? And then they can't move, which I think scientists talk about a phantom limb or a brain sensation, which is responsible for causing these individuals not to move. This happens too many times, and I've heard about it too many times, and I will still argue in every situation, this is why they can't move. That would be my question. So if you have answers, make sure you either chime in on this podcast, or write on my website, or let me know if you have the answers. But as far as I'm concerned, I believe the kids. I believe they don't benefit. It's too many of them in different situations, which I also said prompted me to write this blog and start talking about these things on the podcast. It's just too many of them with the same stories. We have to pay attention to that. It means something. So, like I said on my blog, maybe if it was just one story, I would kind of go, I remember back in the day, I used to kind of go, 20 years ago, because it was just one family or one kid, or maybe even two kids that said they could see ghosts. And so back then, and I'm thinking back, I probably didn't believe it or thought, yeah, science uh, can justify why there's no such thing as ghosts, or why you don't see ghosts, and blah, 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 blah. But I have to say, again, psychology is a science, and even scientists know that some experiments fail, and some of the things that they find are actually not true for the entire population of people. And so you can't thoroughly explain everything with science. You just can't. For kids that can see ghosts and adults that can see ghosts, for them, the problem stems from demonic activity. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely mind blowing, and it still is for me too. So there are a lot of people who chime in sometimes, and I do appreciate all of the feedback, who say, I wouldn't believe these kids and adults at all, not even about them thinking that demons are on their chest. You know, when something is abnormal to people, instead of listening and trying to understand, they're quick to attribute the cause for some of these things happening to science, or they'll have some other justification. So if we can't prove it, it doesn't happen, or it cannot happen. So there must be some type of explanation for this. And I don't knock anybody's thinking. Your thinking is your own, just like your opinions. But, and I have no reason to lie to the public, all of these stories are true, every single one of them. Until you've dealt with individuals who have these abilities, it is really hard to believe. Like you, some of you, again, sometimes I look back at the blog and go, oh man, that is really interesting. I remember when that happened. Woo, how come I wasn't scared back then? Or this just seems so unbelievable, but it's true. And it is, because I was there. Just like this conversation earlier this year. So, another little kid, a little one this time. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not even sure if this one, because I remember this conversation earlier this year, and this was a little person. When I say little, I mean under fifth grade. So I'm not even, let me say under fourth grade, make it a little younger. I'm not even sure if this one realized that this was a ghost, what I'm about to say to you. So this little kid said to me about she or he being really scared. And when I asked why, I said, because when I go to sleep, this thing stays by my bed. Sometimes it'll sit on me and I can't get up. Ding, 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 ding. I'm like, in my brain going, crap. We had another case of what I've been hearing about from some kids that can see ghosts. So this little one said, so of course my antenna went up, right? And so this little one said, I just can't get up. Um, it's in my basement. It follows me to school. And the conversation went on and on and on. So little kids kind of describe these things differently, of course, in teenagers and definitely adults. And so I was in my brain formulating all these hypotheses like, okay, let me make sure this is not like a human, you know, making this child uncomfortable in the home, touching this kid in places they don't want to be touched, which this kid did not allude to that. But again, my antenna, my radar is going off. And who's following this kid to school? So I kind of always keep it in reality like that. Um, for a child's safety, but also, to rule out different things or different possibilities of, kids being harmed. And so I'm like, okay, who's in your basement? No, it goes in my basement. Okay, who follows you home from school? No, it follows me. And of course, if this is if the kids give me any inclination that they're being harmed or threatened or anything like that, that's an immediate call to parents or guardians, you know. However, little kids like to draw. So sometimes if you're not sure and you cannot get a feel for what is actually happening to these kids, you can have them draw. So here's what I did. Had the kid draw. And you know what this kid drew? A really dark picture of something, a stick figure and something behind it. And it was very clear that it was not human. A stick figure sleep and something hovering over it. And it wasn't human. Which, of course, I showed the parent, and they're like, well, yeah, I think my kid can see ghosts. And that's what it is. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then a teenager mentioned to me, my eyes were open and I saw it. I always see it. It just sits on me, right? I don't know how to get rid of it. I can't get rid of it. It wakes me up at night. I can't move. It sits on my chest. I can't call my mother to help me because I can't talk. It grabs me like when it sits on me. And it stops if I call out God's name or if I pray about it. If I call out Jesus' name, it just goes away. Isn't that interesting? I know that's something that I talk about that worked for me when I dealt with these kind of kids. And the kids tell me that it works, you know. And so this is why over the years, I've never forgotten a lot of these stories. And I've never forgotten a lot about a lot of these stories because they're phenomenal stories like this, you know. So when this kid said that's what she or he does when this thing is pressing down on his or her chest or in the room or grabbing him or her or just out of fear, I stop. It stops when I pray. These are kids telling me this stuff, unless I have to teach some of these things to them to help them cope. So, the point of this blog that I write, and then I talk about what I write on the podcast, is because it happens over and over and over again to many people. Just look at the internet as far as reputable sites. You'll see some of these things. People talk to me all about it. Now, when they do tell me about their experiences when they sleep, I'll tell you, they will say to me, this is not a psychological condition, Dr. Lisa. This is a ghost. What do you think? I would love to know what you think. When they tell me about their experiences, it makes me even question whether or not this is sleep paralysis or if they're right. And for those of us who cannot see ghosts, we don't know. But for myself, I tend to believe that there is something to the stories of these individuals who talk about sleep paralysis being truthfully for them. And in their defense, I think they're right because there are so many stories about this over and over again. Hey, let me prove it to you. If you go to sleep paralysis and you just hit Google Images, you will see some of the things that I talk about or that I talked about in the podcast today, just in Google Images. So let me just sidebar for a second. So when I think of these topics based upon stories that I've heard from children, sometimes to kind of give you all a visual of what they've said to me, that's what I'll do. I'll go ghost or sleep paralysis, for example, and these wonderful art will it just comes up, you know, and it baffles me because I'm like, okay, so there are lots of stories about this stuff, and people actually draw pictures of these things based upon what they see or experience or, hear other people talk about. So, like some of you, it blows me away too, because I'm like, I thought these were, you know, these stories that I'm talking about now from Blog 50 and up are more recent stories. Like my earlier stories are from 15 to 20 years ago. So 15 to 20 years ago, we didn't have, the technology that we have now. Let me say even 25 to 30 years ago. And so this stuff was being told to me back then, 25 to 30 years ago. And so, you know, I, I still, as you can hear my voice, because I stuttered a little bit, that when I go to Google and look this stuff up, like, oh, I got to get a good picture so they can see it the way that the kids saw it. And then I see all these pictures of sleep paralysis with, women laid out on their backs or men and kids. They can't get up with some strange freaking dark thing on their chest. I'm like, there are other people who talk about these things apparently because there's all this stuff, all of these pictures. I don't have to look at anybody's writing because I have my own stories, but I look for pictures. So I just think it's interesting that now I realize, you know, as kind of like a midlife psychologist, that kids 25 years ago, they weren't alone. And so now I can tell some of the kids that I write their stories and they give me full permission to write their stories confidentially now, the kids that I'm meeting. And I tell them all the time, you are not alone. You really need to go and look some of this stuff up. And the teenagers do, and they come back and tell me, like, man, I thought I was the only one who could see ghosts. No, I've been telling these stories for about a year now, and I tell them all the time, go read my blog. You are not alone. Not at all. And neither are you adults who have this ability. So I am going to keep talking about these stories. Um, and I am so happy to be back. You guys have no idea. So we are going to talk about angry kids next week. And let me think. I wrote this for a parent because a parent has told me she or he did not know what to do with their angry child. And I actually really like working with angry kids. So I say, yeah, I'll write you a blog about angry kids. And no one will ever know who this parent is. When you all have time, read up on angry kids, comment, like, and share your stories or things that you've done to help angry children. This was also a time when something happened, and I have to look it up before we talk next week. I believe there was some type of shooting from a young or older teenager, 19 at that time. I have to look it up, so don't quote me. I don't remember, but I remember it was something. And then at that time, I was meeting a lot of angry kids. So when this parent asked me, I said, you know what? Yes, I will absolutely write one. And I think some of that blog too had to do with parenting. Yep. I just looked at it. Some of it had to do with parenting. So we are going to dive into that. Next week I'll be taking a full hour. It'll be from about 7:30 to 8:30. Don't forget I'm going to have to change the time. Um, so we'll talk about angry kids and then we'll go from there. So I will definitely talk to all of you next week. Call me if you need to. 765-205-1959. And don't forget the email address, kidscanseeghosts@gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, I'm sorry I haven't been here. It's just life, guys. You gotta forgive me. And then I'll talk to you all next week. Have a good night.